Serious? What was your creepy, unexplainable story as a child that was confirmed by your parents to have happened? Was looking for a Halloween costume with my mom to wear to elementary school, which was a big deal to me because I was homeschooled at first. We spent a couple of hours going to several stores and couldn't find anything that I liked. It was getting dark outside, so we were going to have to find something and go home soon. There was an old Halloween costume store, one of those really weird places that somehow is open year round, that we decide to go to as a last ditch effort to find something. We got out of the car and walked through the front doors and get 3 steps into this place and I instantly have all the hair on my body stand on end. I felt huge oppressive pressure on my whole body, like the physical feeling of being hated by something, combined with its wanting to hurt me and wanting me to leave. My little 3rd grade, I think that's when it happened. Self turned to look at my mom and in the same instant she turned to look at me. We didn't say a thing to each other, just turned around. After only walking 3 steps into the store and went back to the car. I remember getting inside and asking my mom if she felt the same thing and she said that she had had essentially the same experience as me. We prayed together in the car and left. For perspective, I, as an elementary school kid who desperately wanted to fit in with the other kids that I had recently joined in public school, willingly left our literal last chance to find a costume that I thought would help me fit in, because of a physical feeling of being hated that I got when we walked into the store. As an adult I can still remember how bad it was and I'm getting tensed up just writing about it. I did end up with a costume that year though. We went home and she stayed up late with me working to cobble together a cowboy costume from things we had at home. I had a cowboy hat from my grandpa, some cowboy boots from somewhere, a button-down shirt that we ripped a bit to make it rugged, a bright red bandana to tie around my neck, and a swanky leather vest we made from a brown grocery bag that we cut some super cool tassel fringe onto. Cobbled costumes are the best. In the house I grew up in, every night at around midnight these big loud footsteps would go stomping up and down the hallway a few times. I'd often think it was my dad getting up in the night, so sometimes I would stick my head out in the hall to see him, but there was no one there and I'd hear him snoring in his room. This isn't a particularly creepy story, but it's just strange that everyone confirms they heard these footsteps and no one was ever that bothered by it. It's like it happened for as long as we could remember, so we just accepted it. I'm not 100% sure this fits because my mom confirmed it years ago, then denied it when I asked her again a couple months ago, but here it is. When I was little, my dresser, it was long but pretty short, sat against the wall with one of the ends pointed to my door. That dresser is heavy, an old wood one with all sorts of kid crap neatly arranged on top. Since it was in my bedroom, the floor was carpet. I always slept with the door closed. One night, with no explanation, the dresser tipped over, but instead falling forward, it fell 180 degrees to the side, falling in front of my door. All the kid crap spilling to the side. My mom ran to get me, but couldn't open the door as it was being blocked by the dresser. Eventually, with her pushing and me pulling on the dresser, she was able to slip in and move the dresser out of the way. Nothing was damaged, not even the glass figurines I had. My dad helped put it upright the next day and we moved on. Years later, I remembered the incident and asked my mom about it, expecting to learn that I blew it out of proportion and it only fell forward or something like that. Nope, she remembered that night as well. However, she added one detail that I could never figure out. She thought she heard me jumping on the bed that night, and that was why she thought the dresser tipped over. I had been asleep. I have no idea where she heard that noise coming from. When I was young, I apparently had a few odd interactions with animals. I would know a person had animals before we went in the house. They tended to come over to me before my parents, mostly just little things that were probably explainable by me, a fairly observant little kid. The one that sticks out to my parents though, telling it the way they do, is we went to a new car garage to have them work on our car. As we pull up, the owner has a big old black lab laying in the middle of the lobby. The guy informs us the dog is comfortable with people. We can pet him if we want. I shake my head and say he's sad though. Dad looks at me, asks why I think that. I reply he lost his ball. He's sad now. Dad said the owner went pale, stared at me for a minute, and then looked at Dad, said he's had a favorite ball for 10 years that just went down the sewage drain yesterday and I couldn't get it back out. Just reach in the sewer and get it back from the nice clown. When I was 3 years old, my grandmother died. She lived in our house with us and we were very close. She had told my mom many times that she would do her best to make her passing easy on me since I was so young. The night that she died, my mom was laying in bed with her and heard her take her last breath. My mom laid there and cried for about 30 minutes before coming into my room to check on me. It was about 5 AM and there was no reason for me to be awake, but I was sitting up in my crib playing, and when my mom asked why I was awake, I said, "Grandma Flo just came in to give me a kiss goodbye." Flo is a nice name. One time my brother, his friend, and I saw lights in the sky that darted around like UFOs. We went to get my mom and she was totally nonchalant about it. "Yep, those are UFOs," she said, and went back in the house. Her response was so subdued that we figured she was humoring us and they weren't actually UFOs. Years later I asked her about it and she said she had to force herself to act calmly because she was terrified. If she didn't know what they were, she was right in calling them UFOs. I'm a parent of toddlers and kids now, and I have a creepy story from last year. We were driving with my then 3-year-old son in the car, and stopped at a red light next to a cemetery. Out of nowhere, my son looked over at the cemetery and said there are people laying down there, and they can't get up. My wife asked my son what he was talking about and he pointed to the cemetery and said all of the people laying down in the park are stuck. My wife and I just looked at each other in silence, completely freaked out. At this point in our son's life, there had been no deaths in the family and we had never discussed death with him. I'm still creeped out when I think about it. About 5 years ago, my parents were sitting out on the back porch on a summer night. Out of the corner of her eye, my mom saw a person-sized white translucent figure float by a tree. She asked my dad if he saw it too and he said yes. He is a tough guy, but he was really freaked out and so was she, so they both went inside. The next morning my mom was walking by the tree where they saw the figure and she noticed a very old looking earring sitting on top of the dirt. She doesn't wear earrings and it wasn't the kind of earring I would wear. It looked like it belonged to an old lady and it was just dropped there. My mom brought it inside and put it in her jewelry box. The next day it was sitting in the middle of the basement floor. From then on I started hearing footsteps and whispering in my room at least once a week until I moved out. My grandmother was a real estate agent in Rhode Island. I was staying with her one summer and she had to take me along to see a potential listing. It was a very strange house because it was circular. All the rooms went along the outside and connected to each other, and there was a center part with a little garden and open to the sky. She went up to the second story and I stayed downstairs because I wanted to walk around the loop one time. The problem started when I had walked a full loop and I didn't see the stairs. I thought I must be confused, so I kept going to the next room and still couldn't find them. I started to panic, so I began running around the house as fast as possible, checking every room for stairs, and there wasn't any. Finally, I sat down by the front door and started crying. A little while later my grandmother ran into the entryway room looking just as panicked as I had been and asking where I was hiding and why I was hiding and not answering her calling out to me. I never heard her calling out to me at all. Actually, the house seemed so still and quiet while I was sitting there that I was sure she had forgotten and left me there. We went home and didn't talk about it really. Like 15 years later I brought it up to my mom and asked if she knew anything, or was this a crazy childhood nightmare I'm remembering? She told me she remembered it clearly because my grandmother had called her and was absolutely spooked because she couldn't explain what had happened and she thought she lost me or I had been taken by someone while she was distracted. She had apparently been looking for me for a while. I still don't understand what happened really because the house wasn't even large or confusing to navigate. I still get chills when I think about it. Oh man, it's like the house was trapping you. That is freaky. I was in 7th grade when my parents bought their first computer, so not super young. We had a small ranch, so my dad built a corner desk in the basement in one of the finished off rooms since there was no room anywhere else. House was built by my dad in the mid 80s. No one had lived there before us. When my mom would get home from work, we'd hear her set down her keys on the counter and walk across the kitchen floor in her heels. It was a frequent occurrence for my brother or I to be on the computer. Happened to each of us quite a bit, and hear sounds of my mom putting her keys on the counter and walking across the kitchen floor. Same as when she gets home from work. In going upstairs to check to see if my mom was home, she wouldn't be home. We would tell my mom when it happened, and it happened enough where we tried to figure it out by checking the time we'd hear it. A few times, she said she'd been thinking about work at that time and happened to look at the clock. We tried to figure it out and have no idea to this day why it would continuously happen. A few times my mom mentioned she'd be on the computer and hear someone upstairs, and no one would be home. My dad didn't allow pets in the house either, so it wasn't just a cat being a jerk. Dad built the house on a time fault. Things get a bit out of order occasionally. I woke up one night when I was 12 because I dreamt that my older brother got into a car accident. I got out of bed and wandered downstairs to the kitchen to get something to drink. My mother was sitting there and asking me why I was awake. I told her I had a bad dream and need something to drink. I got a glass of water when it ringed at our door. My mother went to look who was there in the middle of the night. 2 police officers that asked if they could come inside for a moment. I couldn't hear what they were talking about because I was still in the kitchen and they were in the hallway. After the 2 officers left, my mother came back to the kitchen completely pale and told me that I should go to bed now. I asked her what's wrong when she informed me that my brother was in a car accident and she needs to wake up my dad and go to the hospital now. When I pointed out that this was the bad dream I had before waking up, she only looked at me for a couple of seconds. I prepared myself for comments like don't be silly and go to bed now, but instead she said me too. So basically, we both had the same freaking dream of my brother having a car accident, and we both woke up minutes before the police came over to tell us it really happened. My brother survived with some minor injuries and we've seen the photos of the accident in the newspaper the next day. It looked 100% like in my dream, to the smallest detail. The way he lost control over the car, where it flipped the first time and the tree it came to a stop. Even today my mother and I talk about this. Nobody else believes us when we tell the story. When my family went to the Georgian mountain region, we rented a cottage, 2 bedrooms. So my brother and I took one and our dad took the other with his GF. I woke up in the middle of the night to 3 figures in the room, all standing in various places, none of which were visible from the entrance of the room. I woke my brother up and we screamed for our dad, but when he came into the room, he refused to look at the figures and just told us to hide under the covers. Wasn't exactly confirmed, but his refusal to look where they were standing after begging him was telling. Crap still scares my brother and I. In Mom's seaside hometown, there was an offshore decommissioned lighthouse. Even though utilities to it had long been shut off and the lighthouse was locked, it would randomly light up, clearly visible in all directions. No one could explain it. It happened so infrequently and at odd hours of the night that by the time officials examined the structure, there were no signs of activity. To this day, as I've mentioned here once before, the lighthouse remains mysterious and a bit creepy. This is my uncle's story. Didn't happen to me. My grandparents' house has a big closet in the entranceway. It's where everyone hangs their coats and puts their shoes whenever they come inside. When my uncle was early teens, he started to have nightmares about something evil trying to take him, and whatever it was always came out of that specific closet. He would tell us about it and it would always freak us out. Then around Thanksgiving, we had a huge gathering with a ton of family members. My uncle starts to tell some of my other cousins the story, when out of nowhere, my other uncle, his older brother of about 15 years, interrupts and says, "Are you talking about the thing in the closet?" Needless to say, we all freaked out. Both uncles then started discussing the experiences they had when they were teenagers. A lot of the same things happened to both of them, mainly that they both got the same nightmares. I'm 34 years old, and whenever I visit my grandma, I still don't use that closet. When I was 9 or 10, my dad took me to visit with an older hunting buddy friend of his. My parents were divorced and my dad lived in another part of the country, so while I had known this guy since I was a toddler, I didn't share the same common interests as either of them. The older friend was a gun dealer and had lots of catalogs. This was before the internet was in wide use, to order bullets, magazines, guns, etc., and they often spent hours going through listings to determine what they wanted to order. We got there fairly early and my dad said that after an hour or two we'd all go to Hoodie's for breakfast before going to shoot clay birds. Now I'm a youngin'. I don't care much about guns or hunting for sport and I'm just incredibly bored, so I start wandering around the house. reading my video game magazines that I brought with me, and very quickly that hour or two has passed and they're still down there. I ask if they're going to leave anytime soon and a friend suggests I check the refrigerator in the kitchen and see if there's anything I want to eat. I look through the fridge and find nothing. However, on the kitchen table I see an apple and decide that will be appetizing enough to hold me over. As I pick up the apple and prepare to take a bite, at that point his wife steps in and tells me don't eat that. Everything in the bowl is wax. I tell her thank you for warning me and continue to wander around the house burning time until we can get going. Maybe another 30 minutes later I go back to the basement where they're going through catalogs and ask when we are going to Hardee's. My dad's friend asks if I'm still hungry after going through their fridge. I tell him that I was going to eat an apple but his wife told me it was wax before I made the mistake. Both of them give me a blank stare and after about 20 seconds of shock my dad explains that his wife recently passed away. I then go back through the house to try to find her to show that they were just joking with me, but sure enough she was nowhere to be found. Roughly 30 years later, before he passed away, my dad still insisted that I must have imagined it. But I didn't. She told me not to eat the wax fruit. Geez, imagine if your unfinished ghost business was to protect a bowl of waxed fruit for eternity. At my parents' house I used to hear my mom calling out to me when she didn't, and she confirmed she'd hear me call out to her when I didn't. That was a common occurrence. Also, whenever I'd be alone for a little while, if my mom was late from work or at the grocery store, I'd usually be in the main living room playing N64. I would oftentimes hear loud banging sounds from upstairs as if a heavy piece of furniture tipped over. I'd go check and nothing was out of place. Both my mother and grandmother have confirmed similar experiences when they're alone in the house. There was also the time I was downstairs on my laptop. Everyone else was in bed. It was after midnight and I didn't realize just how dark everything had gotten without the lights on. I'm zoned out when I begin to hear what sounds like a murmuring from behind me. Like the low rumble you'd hear at a gathering when people are talking and you can't make out conversation. The hairs on my neck immediately stood up and my body locked up from fear. Tears ran down my face from the physical reaction my body was having. I refused to acknowledge it and kept staring at my laptop screen in silence. It took forever for my body to go back to normal. Some time later I told my mother what happened and it freaked her out because she said she's heard the murmuring as well. I've always hated that house. Not necessarily creepy, but when I was around 11 or so, my mom and I were going about 40 miles outside of town for a typical orthodontist appointment. The trip typically took about 35 minutes, give or take a few for traffic. However, this one time I kinda zoned out while being driven and upon arriving we remarked, wow, that was fast. We were earlier for my appointment than usual despite leaving at a consistent time for each appointment. Upon looking at our vehicle's clock and confirming with a watch my mom had on, it had mysteriously taken us only 10 minutes to drive the usual 35-minute distance. We have no recollection of anything happening during those 10 minutes, and it never happened again. But it left us with a very weird feeling. We still wonder what we drove through to this day. So I don't actually remember this, but my mom told me about it. My grandfather died when I was a year old. Prior to his death, he loved to play with me and would make me laugh in this very specific way. The night he died, my mom heard me making noise. So she goes in assuming I'm crying, but I'm not. I'm staring at the ceiling, laughing hysterically just like my grandfather used to make me laugh. She's still convinced he came to say goodbye to me. This is sort of embarrassing. My mom got an IUD after my sister and I were born. 4 years after my sister, a random priest stopped her in the streets and told her, "Why are you stopping Goddess Durga's will? She wants to gift you a son." My mom was understandably freaked out. It's not like my family didn't want a son, because trust me, Asian obsession with sons is real. It's just that they didn't want another daughter, so they weren't trying. Anyways, a few days later we had a curtain, sort of like a musical prayer meeting, and one of the ladies there got possessed by Goddess Matala, as Indians call it. Sort of like a trance possession, and the person possessed starts spewing all sorts of things that make sense but don't. Super creepy, scary crap. So, that woman, a stranger, straight up looked at mom and handed her an apple. Said, "Eat it and get that foreign thing out. I want to give you a son. How dare you deny me of my wish?" Word spread like fire about this incident. Suddenly half the town was interested in my parents' marital life. Small town. Mom didn't budge then though. My parents met another priest who they considered their teacher. He said that they should try and let what's meant to be happen. Well, I had a brother within a year. Most exciting 9 months for our town since we didn't know the gender. Gender testing is illegal in India to prevent female foeticide. That was incredibly informative. Not so much creepy as unexplainable. I have a memory of standing in my grandmother's suburban backyard with my cousin. We were maybe 3-4 years old, watching a line of penguins in a neighboring yard climb up a pool slide and slide down into a pool, one by one. They would swim to the stairs, waddle out of the pool and around the pool back to the slide stairs and wait in line to go down the slide again. I never mentioned the memory and assumed, because it was so implausible, that I dreamt it up or remembered wrong. A couple decades later, I visited my grandmother and this same cousin was also visiting. We were sitting at my grandma's kitchen table which looked out at her backyard. There was a lull in the conversation, and we were all looking out the window. It made me think of the whole penguin memory, so I brought it up. My cousin's eyes widened and she said she had the same memory, but, like me, thought it was a dream. My grandma chuckled and said, "Well, the neighbor that used to live there did work for the zoo." Not exactly a confirmation, but did that really happen? Even if he did work for the zoo, you can't just bring a dozen penguins home, can you? When I was little, probably about 5, my great-grandmother passed away from cancer. We were very close. She watched me nearly every day and would sing to me before my naps. "You Are My Sunshine" in particular. It was a few days after she died and I can instinctively remember waking up to someone stroking my hair and singing "You Are My Sunshine." At first, I thought it was my mom, but it was unlike her to do something like that. I turned and found no one there. I even remember getting up and checking my parents' room to find they were both asleep. Both my parents kind of just nonchalantly dismiss it, but I swear it was her saying goodbye to me. A grandmother's love is so strong, even death cannot break it. When I was a kid, my mom used to work at a small grocery store and she went there before breakfast to get fresh bakery goods when she had the afternoon shift. Then she used to wake me up for school and ask how I slept, and I used to tell her what dream I had that night, if any. One morning I told her I dreamed that 2 guys broke into the store and they left a red screwdriver on the floor. My mom was shocked, because there really was a break-in that night. That is why she couldn't buy stuff for breakfast that morning, but couldn't talk with police or colleges at the time to get more details. I then went to school. My mom did the afternoon shift and on the evening, when she came home, she told me that the police really did found a screwdriver on the scene, which belonged to the burglar. This all happened in Europe, a small town around the early 90s. No CCTV in the burglar. Never got caught. But this was still a very strange experience. My mom made me fill out a lottery ticket the next day, LOL, but never won with it and never had such dreams since then. I love that she got you to pick out a lottery ticket. She just rolled with it. When I was growing up, I lived in a small bungalow with my parents. My room was directly beside my parents' room. I had a fish tank with a light and used this as a sleep aid. The dim light of the tank and the bubbling sound of the filter put me at ease. One night I woke up and I saw the outline of a man wearing a trench coat and a top hat standing beside my bed looking at me. Naturally, I screamed as loud as I could and my parents came running into the room and turned the light on and the man was gone. They comforted me back to sleep and that's all I remember about that. Fast forward 3-4 years. I move my room to the basement and my parents knock down the wall to make their room bigger, but they keep their bed in the exact same place. Over the next year, I would wake up to screams from upstairs and hear my mom crying. She would always see outlines of a man standing in the exact place where I witnessed it before. They even moved their bed to attempt put it where the figure would appear to stop it from appearing. It still scares me to this day thinking about that house and I'm glad I'm nowhere near there anymore. I like their logic. Like, this terrifying ghost keeps appearing in this one spot, so let's sleep in that spot. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.